Very grateful, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for being here today. As we look at what the financial services and actually the Ag Committee is doing in the digital asset space, there are just a few of us who are serving in this crossover role between commodities and securities. One of the things that we have found in both, and I was just coming between each committee right now, is that there seems to be a lack of a regulatory environment or structure that really provides the rules of the road, and there's a lot of talk about people jumping in and framing it without necessarily talking to each other, which is where I applaud the chairs of both the Financial Services and the Ag Committee for working well on this in the House. I also want to note, as a military member myself and someone who spent over a decade in counterintelligence working in illicit financing, I want to thank the Treasury for being such a strong leader in this. And that's why this morning we introduced the bipartisan, bicameral Financial Technology Protection Act of 2023 with my colleague, Representative Himes, Senator Budd, and Senator Gillibrand. Specifically, what this legislation would aim to do is look at independent financial technology working group to include terrorism and illicit financing. Treasury was very helpful in providing some feedback to that and helping us shape it. Specifically in this working group, Mr. Nelson, I want to highlight that this includes our senior levels from the DOJ, FBI, CIA, FinCEN as a partner in this, just to name a few. As we look forward on this, Mr. Doss, I'd like to begin with you. This working group's intent is to conduct independent research on terrorists, how their illicit financing works, how they fund things going forward. It would be a window into how this is operating, particularly now that we're looking at digital assets as being a key mode for these individuals to finance themselves, everything from the IRGC to cartels south of the border. One of the things that you had brought up here was your wealth of knowledge related to the illicit finance and use of digital assets. In your view, is this something that Treasury, along with other senior representatives from both the government and our private sector partners, should further explore to combat and really get their arms around the scope of illicit financing?
So thank you for that. At FinCEN, we currently have a number of engagements where we have public-private opportunities to exchange information. We have a program called the Innovation Hours program where we meet with private sector stakeholders, and we use our FinCEN exchanges to exchange information with private sector stakeholders and law enforcement around issues involving digital assets and payment modernization, and to be able to understand the illicit finance risks. Again, these are ongoing conversations. We plan on continuing these conversations as we think through the risks and the impacts on our regulatory framework.
Has it been helpful?
Those conversations have been incredibly helpful for us to be able to understand the lay of the land with respect to where innovation is going and what the illicit finance risks are associated with that. They've also been incredibly helpful to us for law enforcement and us to be able to communicate some of those illicit finance risks to those innovators and entrepreneurs that are developing new systems. Again, for us, what we see over and over again is that technology is incredibly important to be able to provide financial services to customers across the board, but often it's important for those technology innovations to ensure that compliance is built in and that they understand what the compliance framework is.
So, Mr. Doss, I appreciate that. I think the feedback, particularly from the private sector and where the innovation is going, is key. Let me get to the second part of this. In 2020, I believe you put out a request for feedback, or FinCEN did. I've not seen any of that feedback reported out. So my question here is, when you get feedback from market participants, particularly on the private side, and then any proposed rule change, what were the primary concerns with any proposal going forward, and do we have a timeline in which we here in Congress are going to get to see that?
So thank you. I think you're referring to a couple of proposals that were made in late 2020 with respect to digital assets. Those proposed rulemakings had a number of comments. I think one of them had about 8,000 comments. The other had 2,000 comments. We've been reviewing those. Those raised some very complicated policy issues for us.
3 years on, are we going to get to see that report?
We're still working through a final rulemaking with respect to all of those comments.
Okay, we would like to see that sooner rather than later. If there's not a need for one, then let's move forward. Very quickly, Mr. Secretary, I want to follow up on what the chair asked. I know we don't advertise what our sanctions regimes are, but we also know the danger of not having a sanctions regime that is effective and timely. Sanctioning Russian oligarchs' yachts clearly has not slowed down the war in Ukraine. My concern here is there a plan in place for a situation with the Taiwanese Strait specifically?
Again, I'll just...
If you're not going to comment, that's fine, but I do want to highlight the intractable and secondary effects of a sanctions regime against a nation like China. If it is not thought out ahead of time, will have massive ramification. Are you considering that?
So one of the things that we've done, and just briefly, happy to send more information, is just stood up an office of sanctions economists in order to really go after sort of the effect of our sanctions, mitigations, and then sort of do an after action every time we do a sanction so that we can be more effective.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield my time.